To be honest, the amount of positive feedback we received was quite beyond our expectations. Hello, and welcome. This little section was prepared for people like you, who finished our game OPUS. After working in games for many years, OPUS is our first title to have received this amount of feedback. Therefore, I'd like to share my thoughts on the development of OPUS, and hopefully answer some of your questions in the process. Hope you enjoy. The majority of players in the current mobile game market are concentrated on a handful of top-ranking titles in the App Store. Basically, if your game can't land a spot in the top 100, which includes huge apps like Facebook and Instagram, then keeping the studio alive becomes a challenge. Unfortunately, this promotes games that are designed to appeal to the largest possible audience, which in turn causes them to become increasingly similar. This is simply the market mechanism at work, but it leaves much to be desired for those with niche interests, like people who like story or different subjects. OPUS was born under this premise. Instead of being a generic experience for many people, it tries to be great for a few people. To some extent, it is our contribution to diversity. Most of us spent our childhood playing classics like Final Fantasy, Metroid, and Legend of Zelda, and grew up dreaming about making games that would move people in the same way these titles did. But in reality, we end up pumping out social games and online RPGs from a handful of templates, and get tired of the industry's monotony. This is something that most developers of our generation face, the urge to break the mold and make something that has a lasting impression. And we feel that OPUS is our first step to answering that call. The music for OPUS has been gathering praise since early development, and we have our composer, Trio Dust, to thank for that. We started by outlining an arc with Trio as he worked on an overall motif. These then became the basis for every chapter's theme, and this method worked well for most tracks, which were kept fairly open-ended. However, some sections required the music to be more defined and on-beat, and these were written with the additional use of game footage as guides. The final soundtrack has a total of 12 tracks and over 60 sound effects. For an indie production of this scale, that's a pretty solid amount, and it's fair to say that without Trail Dust, Opus would be quite far from what it is now. Opus has received quite a bit of positive feedback for its story, which many thought was written before the game was designed around it. In reality, it was the other way around. We settled on the core game mechanic early on and tried to build a story and setting that fits. In total, the story went through 4 major rewrites, which really taught us how different writing for games are from film and novels. These stories require a deep connection with the core interaction and must hold up to all its variations without breaking down. For example, the main character was originally a little boy, whose goal was to carry on his family's mission of completing an astronomical report. But this causes a few issues. First, a human boy talking to himself on an empty ship is a pretty tough challenge if you wanted to create some kind of dramatic curve. Plus, it would be hard to explain the appearance of any outside force. Second, if the goal was to collect data for a stated number of planets, it would be difficult to get people to care about the exact number or lead up to a strong ending. Questions like these were raised and discussed throughout much of our development, which brought us to our final setting, a childlike robot, a big sister figure, and a clear, simple goal. Opus's length was more or less decided from the very beginning to be roughly 90 minutes per playthrough. We intended the experience to be like a short film. However, this also became one of Opus's biggest design challenges, as we needed to keep the gameplay fresh, without introducing too many new mechanics, as each one takes time for players to get used to. But this is easier said than done, since the mechanic needs to be easy to learn, have room for variation, have good replayability, and fit well with the story. Most of all, we have to be able to keep players from getting stuck, as this greatly affects the pacing, especially for a story-driven game. And so we tweaked everything from the direction each level pointed you in, the size and color of each star, the formation of stars around each target, the average time it takes for each level, and even how many times each interface is accessed per level. All of these went through numerous iterations to reach the point we're at now, so we definitely hope you enjoyed the levels as much as the story and music. To be honest, the amount of positive feedback we received was quite beyond our expectations, especially in regards to the number of supporting players, and we are deeply grateful for that. Making story-driven mobile games is often a losing proposition, and it's understandable why most developers avoid it. But with Opus, we saw that a demand does exist, and maybe with a bit more time and effort, we could work out a sustainable way to keep making games that challenge the norm. We're a tiny indie studio that's been around for 2 years, and we come from many different backgrounds. One joined us out of dissatisfaction towards the mainstream industry. Another originally owned a restaurant, and others left Japan and the US, the cultural centers of the game industry, for a fresh start back home. Despite our varying backgrounds, we share the goal of creating games that leave an emotional impression. Indie games development is often challenged by low budgets, tough marketing, and general lack of interest from publishers. But this is also our strength, because it allows us to break away from the mainstream and carve out our own path. Although it's hard to say how far we could go, we will continue to march on as long as there is support. If you enjoyed Opus, spread the love. It makes a world of difference for us. And with that, we thank you once again for your support.